How often have you sat in an audience and watched someone drone on and on, flipping from PowerPoint slide to PowerPoint slide? You have no idea where the beginning was. You have no idea when the middle is coming, and you're tortured and fearing that there will never be an end. We need structure. Our audience deserves structure. Whether it be the 5 minutes you've been offered, the 15 minutes you've been offered, or the hour-long meeting that you've been offered, the persuasion should be structured. For many years now, I have been a consultant to a large biopharma company, and I've seen the evolution of their presentations. It used to be that scientists would walk into the executive committee and they would start talking and showing scientific slides. And within about 15 or 20 minutes, one of the executive committee members would have to raise their hand and say, "Excuse me, why are you here? What do you want?" There was no structure in those presentations. At least one structure for persuasion should be familiar to you already. A very simple, age-old suggestion. Say what you're going to say it with lots of proofs and coloring and texture and persuasion, and then say what you've said. If at minimum you are attentive to and careful to say what you're going to say, then say it with some depth, and then say what you've said, you have the beginnings of an elegant structure for a presentation. And I call it the hook, the promise, and the roadmap. The hook. This is where you capture and command the attention of your audience. The hook is designed to get people's attention, to get them to lean in, to get them to listen in a way they've never listened before. There are many ways that you can design a hook. The primary objective is to let people know that this is not any presentation. This is not any day. This is a special moment, and they need to lean in and they need to want to listen. So what do we mean by a hook? Well, there are many examples of hooks that you can use in order to capture and command the audience's attention. It may be that you open the presentation with a data slide that shows an unsustainable trend and creates urgency and a threat. It could be that you use a headline ripped from the pages of the newspaper which has a compelling, relevant message to your audience. It could be that you use a heartfelt story or a story of success or an aspirational story of the future in order to hook and capture and command your audience's attention. There are all kinds of creative hooks that you can use. The objective, capture their attention, capture their imagination, get them to lean in and listen. Let me give you one example of a hook that was used recently in a compelling presentation. A leader got up in front of his teams and told a riveting story of having gone on a mountain climb, an ice climb, with his father-in-law. During the course of the climb, they were all tethered together, and on the way back down the mountain, he tells the story of turning back and looking back for his father-in-law, and his father-in-law had disappeared. As it turned out, he had fallen into a crevice, and as the story progressed, it became clear that the only way that they could get him safely off the mountain was if together they worked as a team, each and every one doing a different task in order to get him safely out of the crevice and down the mountain. Finishing that story, he then said to the group, "It's about teams. My father-in-law would not have survived without a team." And then he transitioned to the body of the presentation, which was about building teams. That was a compelling hook. The promise is your promise to the audience what they are going to learn, believe, or understand at the end of your presentation. Let me say that again. Your promise to them as to what they are going to learn, believe, or understand at the end of the presentation. I promise at the end of this presentation, you will see the value of our investment in. I promise you at the end of this presentation, you will align to and see the value of our culture change toward. I promise you at the end of this presentation, you will recognize the power of this tool to change your industry. You, in effect, are throwing yourself a gauntlet, and you are telling the audience what you are about to prove to them. It's bold, it's dramatic, it is, in fact, saying to them, this is what you will believe, which is going to make them say, well, if that's what I'm going to believe, you better show me how. Here's an example of a promise. At the end of our session together, you'll have all the strategies, knowledge, and tools to make ethical decisions and keep this firm out of trouble. Now, you'll note I didn't use the word promise within the promise, and yet that statement I made about what the audience is going to get from the presentation, that was me throwing myself a gauntlet that I'll need to pick up with the roadmap. The roadmap. So I've hooked my audience. They're attentive. They're listening in. They're curious. They've been moved by the hook. I've thrown down the gauntlet. I've promised them what they're going to learn or believe or understand at the end of the presentation. They're wondering, well, how the heck are you going to get me there? And that's where the roadmap comes in. The roadmap is your opportunity to let the audience know exactly how you're going to use their precious time. It's an opportunity for you to preview the flow or outline of your presentation so that they can buckle in and get comfortable for the ride. You'll notice that when people have a clear understanding of how you're going to use their time, what you're trying to prove, and how you're going to do it, you will have a more attentive audience. The hook, where you capture their attention and let them know this is not just any presentation. The promise, where you throw the gauntlet and let them know what you're going to persuade or prove. The roadmap, how we're going to get there. The hook, the promise, and the roadmap will serve as an elegant introduction to your persuasion. Hook, promise, and roadmap can happen in 30 seconds. Hook, promise, and roadmap can happen in the first 5 or 7 minutes of your presentation, especially if you start with a story. The impact of the hook, promise, and roadmap is similar to say what you're going to say, but much more compelling, much more artful, much more dramatic. Now, a great presentation then moves on to what we call the body of the presentation. The body of the presentation will include the power bites, the storytelling, and the data that helps you deepen the persuasion. Now, in the spirit of say what you're going to say it, and then say what you said, I recommend that you return to the hook, return to the promise, and return to the roadmap. Bookend and add a little poetry to your presentation by going back to that great story you used as a hook, or the compelling photograph, or the urgent piece of data. Remind them of the promise that you made. I suggested you would come to believe. I promised to prove. Review the journey that they have taken with you. We began by surveying. Then I shared. We took a deep dive into. Now you're ready to close. And if the close is a call to action, call them to action. I ask you to join me in supporting. I trust you see the wisdom of. Now I'd like to ask you to engage by. In this way, the persuasive power of the hook, the promise, and the roadmap is fully realized.